Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's coming up to midday. That means Prime Minister's Questions is on its way. And, of course, that's not all. Laura Kunsberg is here. Laura, just before I come to you, something that's just come into the newsroom, Claire. Apparently, there is a head of steam complaints brewing against John Bercow, the Speaker of the House, whom we'll hear from in just a moment, following an attack, a personal attack on you. What happened?
Well, look, I wrote to the Speaker last night because in Bay's oral questions yesterday, he was quite irascible in telling me to give shorter answers. I'm used to that. He does that quite a lot, often with women on the government benches. He's obviously called the Leader of the House of Commons a stupid woman. About a dozen colleagues from all sides of the House, men and women, approached me afterwards to say his behaviour was sexist and demeaning. And I felt that as the principal officer of our precious House of Commons, to in any way to give the impression, even if it's not true, that he's got a women problem in a time when attacks on women, when verbal violence towards women is completely unacceptable, is wrong. And I've asked him to consider his behaviour. Right,
well, do tell us his response when that comes through and whether you're satisfied with it. Laura, today, after the drama of yesterday, which has continued through to this morning.
Oh, it certainly has. I mean, this morning I've been talking to MPs about the meetings that are taking place in the House of Commons, and those meetings are happening, even if Nigel Evans hasn't been invited to any of them. There are Brexiteers meeting, there are Remainers meeting, there is plotting going on, there's no question about that. Words have been used to me like meltdown, confusion, and there is a lot of unhappiness around about how last night unfolded.
Anna Soubry says it's all about trust. Yes. Personal guarantee was given by the Prime Minister.
That's right. And apparently, several of the people who were in that meeting have said that the Prime Minister used the phrase, "This is a matter of trust." And she gave them her personal assurance. Now, the problem, I think, with all of this is something that's been building for a long time, is because in a minority government with a divided party, the Prime Minister has had to give a little bit to this side and a little bit to that side, and maybe be slightly stretchy with what she really wants to do in order to keep the show on the road. The danger in that is that at some point, when it plays out so publicly, as it did yesterday, in front of our eyes, you know, who said the green benches is boring? You could see the deals being done. When that's happening publicly, and when both sides say publicly what their interpretations are, which are very, very different, that looks like double dealing.
What do you think Jeremy Corbyn will ask
Well,
about?
It's interesting because after a habit of almost a leadership lifetime, he never used to ask about Brexit. The last few weeks, he has asked a lot about Brexit. From memory, he went back to the NHS last week. But, I mean, surely today it's just too tempting for him not to go on it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
And of course there are divisions on the Labour side too.
There are, and it's one of the things that the Tory party is doing an amazingly good job of letting Labour off the hook on their own divisions, because they're so consumed with their own internal fights that the Labour.
There isn't a Labour position. Forgive me, there isn't. And
well, Labour say, of course, they do have a position.
It's absurd,
yes, but as
and they're going to have 70 rebels today.
But as we've seen this morning in the studio here, between Nigel and Anna, between the many different factions of the Tory party, and it may well be that come the end of next week, actually, this is all calm, the tide's gone back out and everything's okay. But I have to say, this morning it is very, very febrile, and I think what's dangerous is that there's an element. There is an element that seems to me that trust between Number 10 and the various different factions in the Tory party is in quite significant danger of breaking down.
As well, though, consistently seen the can kick down the road.
Oh,
we've seen the can kick further down the road.
Someone in the cabinet said to me last night, "This is another can kicking exercise."
Look, it can't be, because this is the point that the reason this is so. I agree with Laura. This is really tough times. This is a time for grown-ups to sort this out. Who you're going to trust to deliver? This is not an academic exercise. We are going to have to put together a deal and negotiate it and deliver it in relatively short order with a transition
and keep
period.
everyone on board.
Well, ultimately, yes, and that is what has happened so far.
But is it time, therefore, Minister, for the Prime Minister to change the way she's been trying to handle things. Because what's been said to me again and again and again is the Prime Minister finds it very hard to say no to anyone face to face. But the reality of the situation,
from the cabinet table, that is not true. And again, those who go to brief the journalists are those who have a message to sell. We have got a party that who like the country had strong divisions on the Brexit referendum, just like your party, Tony, just like you and your constituents. And we know we've got to deliver. The question is, what is it you're going to deliver? We are going to deliver a Brexit that allows Parliament to have a meaningful vote on the deal, that keeps our economy growing and thriving, and respects. Hang on, Tony, and respects the unity of the union. That is a monumentally difficult task, but we are going to deliver it with this Prime Minister, tough as it will be.
2 years on, you cannot say to the public that you've got a very clear idea of where this government is going.
No, I disagree. I disagree entirely.
Well, hang on. So, what do you think?
We have set out in the Mansion House speech over and over again what the principles are.
But these are the principles,
but in every negotiation, Tony, whether it's a divorce or it's a marriage, you have to negotiate from a point of principle. That's why.
Were those red lines wise? Leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, are they coming back to haunt Theresa May?
We cannot fulfil the referendum without those things. It doesn't mean we can't trade effectively with the EU.
One of the commitments the Prime Minister has made and has to be delivered on, because this is much more than just an academic exercise, is no hard border in Northern Ireland. Because that is about a potential return.
And you will know from your portfolio.
I do. Yeah. But there is no way you can deliver no hard border in Northern Ireland unless you're prepared to buy into a customs union, unless you're prepared to buy into no divergence from single market standards. Agricultural produce, people cross that border, not day by day, minute by minute. Constantly. To do that, it's incompatible with the different principles.
And on that, why did Philip Lee resign then, in your mind? If the Prime Minister is doing such a good job and achieving what you see as bringing these two sides together, why did Philip Lee resign? And on that, you've got half an hour to answer. More than that, let's go over to the House, John Perko, for a slightly late starting Prime Minister's question.
He's now happily seated. And the junior minister is happily seated, we hope too. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Gareth Thomas.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow marks 1 year on from the Grenfell Tower fire. I know that members from all sides of this House will join me in saying that this unimaginable tragedy remains at the forefront of our minds. On Monday, I had the privilege to attend the very moving vigil in memory of those who were lost that night, and I was honoured to take part in an iftar with members of the local community. Let me again reassure the House that we are doing everything that we can to see that the survivors of Grenfell get the homes and support that they need, and the truth and justice that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this opportunity to wish the England men's football team the very best in the upcoming World Cup. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Gareth Thomas.
I, and I'm sure the whole House, will want to join the Prime Minister in her comments about the Grenfell tragedy 12 months ago. And my constituents certainly will want me to echo her good wishes to the England football team. Can I ask the Prime Minister, though, last year the top 5 cooperatives in our country paid more than 4 times the corporation tax of Amazon, Facebook, eBay, Starbucks and E.ON. The Prime Minister, I'm sure, will want to praise the patriotism of those who have signed up to the Fair Tax Mark campaign. But might this not be an opportunity to encourage the Department for Business and the Treasury to take a more proactive and supportive interest in the growth of cooperative and mutual businesses?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments about his constituency and the support and thoughts that they have for all those who were affected by the Grenfell Tower fire. On the issue of taxation, he may have noticed that actually HMRC has been requiring some of the large companies that he has referenced in his question to pay more tax, and has ensured that we get that tax from them. And of course they look fairly across all types of institution that operate in this country.
Mr. Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, one of the key reasons why people voted to leave the European Union was to get back control of immigration policy so that we could welcome people to our country based on their skills and their talents, not based on the country from which they are from. You can't stay in the European Economic Area, which we're debating later today, without continuing with free movement of people. So can I urge the Prime Minister to stick to our policy of leaving the single market, getting back control of our immigration policy, and not listening to the many Labour voices who want to continue with unlimited migration from the European Union?
I say to my right honourable friend, I absolutely agree with him. The Labour Party used to say that they wanted control of our borders. Now what they want is free movement. We will take back control of our borders.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish the England team all the best in the tournament in Russia and hope it goes really, really well. This week, Mr. Speaker, is an England win. This week is National Carers Week, Mr. Speaker, and I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to those thousands of usually unpaid carers whose commitment to family and friends too often goes unrecognised. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister pointed out, tomorrow marks 1 year on the anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. I'll be meeting families again tomorrow at their silent march. But the sad truth and reality is that many of them are still waiting for the security of a permanent home 1 year on from that disaster. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister met President Donald Trump last week, did she do as the Foreign Secretary suggested and ask him to take over the Brexit negotiations?
Mr. Davis, you're a senior and supposedly cerebral member of the House. Well, in a leap year anyway, you must attempt to recover your composure, man. I'm worried about you, and I'm worried for you. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the Brexit negotiations, I might remind the right honourable gentleman, that before December, Labour cast doubt on whether we would get a joint report agreed. We did. Before March, he cast doubt on whether we'd get an implementation period, and we did. But I wanted, Mr. Speaker, if I may, just to respond to the comment that the right honourable gentleman made about the very important subject of providing those who were the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire with permanent homes. Just so that I can make clear to the House, 203 households were in need of a new home. Every household has received an offer of temporary or permanent accommodation. 183 have accepted an offer of a permanent home. But I just wanted to say this, because it isn't just about the buildings. It's not just about the bricks and mortar of a home. People who suffered that night are having to rebuild their lives. Many of them lost somebody, members of their families with whom they had been living and making a home for years. They lost all their possessions. They lost their mementos. They lost anything that reminds them of the person they loved. When they move into that new home, they will be restarting their lives. And I wanted to pay tribute to all the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire for the strength and dignity that they have shown.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, I too pay tribute to the families for all that they've been through and all the fortitude they've shown. But sadly, the reality is that some of them have still not got a permanent home to move into. It's very important for the mental well-being of everybody. They have somewhere they can call home and they know it is their home. Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister confirmed we would leave the European Union in March 2019 and the transition would end in December 2020. But we now know the government is working on the basis that transition could continue for a further year till December 2021. Could you be clearer today? Which December are we talking about?
No, the right honourable gentleman is quite wrong in his, the way he has put this to the House, so let me be clear to the House. I think what he's trying to talk about is the backstop arrangement that we have agreed. Let's be very clear what this backstop is. This is an arrangement. This is an arrangement that will be put in place in the circumstances in which it is not possible to put the future new customs arrangement in place by the 1st of January 2021. And it is there to ensure that if those new customs arrangements are not in place, that we are able to continue on the basis that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We are working to make sure that the future customs arrangements overall deal with the issue of ensuring no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We don't want the backstop to be necessary. We are working to ensure that we can have our future customs arrangements in place on the 1st of January 2021.
Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Speaker, I'm not really sure whether it's a backstop or a backslide that she's talking about here. Last week I asked the Prime Minister, and I'm sorry to bring this subject up again because it's probably quite painful for her, but when is the government's Brexit white paper going to be published? Because she did say it would be published before the June EU Council summit. Is that still the case?
No, I didn't actually say that. I said the white paper would be published, and we will be publishing it. We will be bringing ministers together. Just calm down. We will be bringing ministers together after the June Council, and the white paper will be published thereafter.
Mr. Speaker, it gets ever more confusing because at the weekend the Cabinet Office Secretary told the BBC that it would not now be until July. Can I offer a solution to her? Instead of worrying about this white paper on which the Cabinet would have to agree, how about making it a green paper in which all their disagreements are in the open and we can all make a comment on it? But if the government does not, Mr. Speaker, as looks likely, have its detailed proposals ready for the June summit, surely the Prime Minister can't be going to Brussels without anything to negotiate on. So is she going to seek a delay to that summit while the government decides what its position actually is?
Perhaps I could just help the right honourable gentleman. The June European Council is not a summit about the Brexit negotiations. There will be many issues that the European Union leaders will be discussing at the June European Summit, including the important issue of sanctions against Russia. I will be pressing to ensure that we maintain sanctions against Russia because the Minsk agreements have not been put in place, and indeed I think there are some areas where we should be enhancing that sanctions regime. He says that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, said that the white paper will be published in July, and that's different from what I've just said. I have to say to him, after the June European Council is July. But if he wants to talk about differences of opinion, I'll tell him what division really is. It's Labour members. It's all very well the Deputy Leader pointing like that. Division is members of the Labour Party circulating instruction manuals on how to deselect all the Labour MPs sitting behind it.
Mr. Speaker, you've got to face the fact. You've got to face the fact there may now be a meltdown. Mr. Speaker, they're not actually my words, but those of the Foreign Secretary, even as his fellow cabinet ministers are preparing people for the government's negotiations, which he clearly thinks are going to end in disaster. And last week he also took aim at the Treasury, who's sitting absolutely next to him, calling them the heart of Remain. he criticised them, saying what they don't want is friction at the borders. What they don't want any disruption to the economy. So does the Prime Minister back the Foreign Secretary in wanting more friction and more disruption to the economy?
Yes or no? Let's talk about the positions on this issue. Labour said they wanted to do new trade deals. Labour said they wanted to do new...
Order. I want to hear both the questions and the answers. And as the record shows... Order. I don't require any assistance in this matter. As the record shows, that will always happen, however long it takes. And there's a lot of noise and much gesticulation from members on both sides of the House. But I want to hear the questions and I want to hear the answers. The Prime Minister, we're grateful.
The honourable member for Bolsover is absolutely right. We're in government, not Labour. And we've set out our position on the border. But what we see is a Labour Party that said it wanted to do trade deals and now wants to be in a customs union that will stop that. They said they wanted to control our borders and now they want free movement. They said they would respect the referendum and now they won't rule out a second referendum. And that's the difference between us. The Conservative Party in government are going to deliver on the will of the British people.
Mr. Speaker, in the parallel universe inhabited by the Foreign Secretary, you're apparently not respecting the referendum result unless you want friction at the borders and disruption of the economy. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet is divided and they're briefing against each other. They're even whispering during Prime Minister's question time. And the Prime Minister has been left with no white paper on which to negotiate. Last week, the transition period was delayed by a year in the space of 24 hours. And yesterday, a deal with her backbenchers was reneged on within hours. Meanwhile, the economy is weakening. Industry is increasingly alarmed at the sheer ineptitude of her government. How much more damage is the Prime Minister going to do to this country before she realises the important thing is to get a deal for the people of this country, not one to appease the clashing giant egos of her cabinet?
It's the Labour Party in opposition that are trying to frustrate Brexit. It's the Labour Party that are trying to stop us getting a deal for the British people. This government will deliver on Brexit. This government will deliver a Brexit for jobs. This government will deliver a Brexit that is good for Britain. And if he wants to talk about the economy, the last Labour government left office with 500,000 more people out of work than when they went into office. What's happened under the Conservatives? We have seen nearly 500,000 more people in work just over the last year. That's Conservatives delivering on a Britain that's fit for the future. And I've heard that the Right Honourable Gentleman is trying to organise a music festival, Labour. I'll pass over the fact it's going to have a solidarity tent, which obviously won't have any Labour MPs within it. But I have to say to him, I don't know if all members of the House are aware of the headline act at Labour Live. The headline acts at Labour Live are the Shadow Chancellor and the magic numbers. Just about sums them up.
Must come to order. We must now hear a most courteous fellow, Richard Drax.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend join a growing number of her ministers who are very supportive of our bid for a one-off grant of £18 million to repair Weymouth's harbour walls and improved flood defences? This work, not my wall, Weymouth's harbour wall. Mr. Speaker, this This work is essential if planning permission is to be granted to redevelop an important retail and housing area in the resort, thereby safeguarding existing jobs, creating new ones and providing more homes.
Well, can I first of all say to my honourable friend, I commend him on the work that he's done. I know he has worked hard on this whole issue of flood defences. I'm sure, however, that he will understand that ministers need to consider the various options for allocations of the fund very carefully. We need to ensure that we're getting the best possible outcomes across the whole country. And the scheme that he has referred to is on the list of projects that is being considered for the £40 million fund. It's intended to support high-risk communities, and we anticipate, I can tell him, we can anticipate that a decision will be made by summer 2018.
Ian Blackford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister gave a commitment that she would treat Scotland as part of a union of equals. Yet last night, she pressed ahead with a power grab in direct opposition to Scotland's elected Parliament. The Prime Minister silenced Scotland's voice, having broken constitutional convention and plunged Scotland into a constitutional crisis. Will the Prime Minister now commit to bringing forward emergency legislation so that the will of the Scottish Parliament can be heard and, more importantly, respected?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that we do expect that the outcome, and it will happen, that the outcome of the whole process of Brexit is going to be a significant increase in Holyrood's decision-making power. It is not the case that this is in any way a power grab. Over 80 areas of responsibility, of decision-making, are going to flow direct to Holyrood. Only the SNP could say that getting 80 areas where more areas where they're going to take decisions was a power grab. If he wants to be concerned about the process that this House has followed in relation to the legislation, his real question should be why it was the Labour Party who manoeuvred last night, used procedural manoeuvres to ensure that there was no debate about the amendments referred to on Scotland.
Ian Blackford. Mr. Speaker, I really do hope that the people of Scotland listened very carefully to what the Prime Minister said, because the reality of the situation is that powers that are enshrined under the Scotland Act in 1998 are being grabbed back by this House. The MPs from Scotland were not given the courtesy of even debating it last night. It is a democratic outrage. The people of Scotland will not be disrespected by this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, under the circumstances, given the disrespect that's shown, I have got no option but to ask that this House now sits in private.
I'm not hearing that at this time, and I'm not obliged to do so, is my clear understanding. Order, the Honourable Gentleman. Order! The right Honourable Gentleman can resume his seat. I'll happily take advice, but I don't think I'm obliged to hear that at this time. Well, what I'd say to the right honourable gentleman is, I think the standing order requires that the matter be put, if it is to be put forthwith. It might be for the convenience of the House for the matter to be addressed at the conclusion of Prime Minister's questions. And if the right honourable gentleman, who had not signalled to me his intention to do this now, order. I'm always grateful for the moral support of the right honourable lady, the member for Broxter, even when it is chunted from a sedentary position. I realise that it's done for my benefit, but I think I can handle the matter. We could have the vote now, but we could have a vote now, or it could be taken at the end. If the honourable gentleman wishes to indicate a desire to conduct such a vote now, so be it. Right.
I beg to move. I beg to move.
Well, my advice, I've had a mixed sequence of advice, is that order. This has not happened, but order. My view is that it is better for the vote to be conducted. My view is that it is better for the vote to be conducted at the conclusion of questions to the Prime Minister. No, I'm not. Order. I always admit of the maximum number of votes and divisions, as the right honourable gentleman should know from his experience in the House. But I hope that he will trust me that I know of what I speak. There can be a division, and it will be at the end of this session, not now. That is the end of the matter. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, might I ask...
No, I'm not debating. No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Mr. Blackford, no, you're not moving anything. Resume your seat, young man. Resume your seat. No. Mr. Blackford, resume your seat. No, resume your seat. No, resume your seat. Mr. Blackford, I'm... Order! The House will have heard very clear... Order, please. The House will have heard very clearly my acceptance that there can be a vote on this matter. Order. Mr. Linden, I say to you, and I say it in the kindest possible spirit, don't tell me what the procedures of this House are. I'm telling you that there can be a vote at the end of this session and not now. I'm not conducting... Oh, no, Mr. Blackford, order, under the... Trying to get him. Under the... Just into the draw. Order, resume your seat, Mr. Blackford. Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, in light of the persistent and repeated refusal of the right honourable gentleman to resume his seat when so instructed, I order the right honourable gentleman to withdraw immediately from the House for order for the remainder of this day's sitting. He is so in... Right, he won't. Right, well, we'll have to have the vote. Very well. The pretend national liberation struggle.
Well, extraordinary scenes in the House of Commons and in the Chamber today, because there has been something of a battle and a showdown between the Speaker, John Bercow, and the SNP leader in Westminster, Ian Blackford, and it has resulted in every SNP member leaving the chamber for the remainder of Prime Minister's questions. I've never seen this before. Anyway, let's go back into the House.
Yeah, you're a very jocular fellow, but you're a little overexcitable today. Calm. Long time to go. I say order! I say only to the House, order! I say only to the House, what a pity, because there are Scottish National Party members of Parliament who had questions on the order paper. And as colleagues know, I always like to get to the end of the order paper. They would have had their chance, and they've lost that chance by their own choice. Mr. Luke Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the amount of people leaving, it feels like one of my after-dinner speeches. Youth unemployment in Thornbury and Yates.
Order! No, I recognise the House. Order! I recognise the House is in a state of some excitement. Even Mr. Hollinbrake, who's normally a model of solemnity, is looking as though Christmas has come early. But order! I beseech the House to try to resume calm, not least out of courtesy to members with questions on the paper, to whom and to whose questions we wish to listen. Luke Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, youth unemployment in Thornbury and Yate is down 23% in the last year, and scrapping stamp duty for over 80% of first-time buyers means more people in South Gloucestershire can afford a home of their own. Does the Prime Minister agree that whilst the party opposite can only offer higher taxes, fewer jobs and broken promises on student debts, this government will be focusing on providing opportunity for young people up and down this country?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I'm pleased to hear that the significant number of young people in Thornbury and Yate who now have jobs and are in work. And in fact, if we look at the figures since 2010, nationally, youth unemployment has fallen by around 141 every single day since 2010. But he's absolutely right. It's not just about ensuring young people are in jobs. It's helping them get on the housing ladder and get that home of their own. That's why we're building more homes, and that's why that cut in stamp duty has been so good for young people, enabling them to be in work and enabling them to have their own home.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell this House what actions she has taken to ensure that no further EU citizens that have been resident in this country for more than 30 years are going to be refused British citizenship like the former Mayor of Ipswich was?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I'm not aware of the particular circumstances of the former Mayor of Ipswich. What we have done in relation to the European Union citizens who are living here in the United Kingdom as we leave the European Union is negotiated a very good arrangements which ensure that their rights here are protected.
In congratulating the member for Harwich and North Essex upon his knighthood, and I do so with some warmth and feeling as we've known each other for 30 years, I call Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with my right honourable friend in remembering the anniversary of the Grenfell fire? Can I commend her for the way she has established the inquiry that is looking into that tragedy? Because can I testify to her, having met victims of the Grenfell fire as she has, they are showing growing confidence that they will get the findings of that inquiry that they want to make sure that such a thing never happens again. And that is, I think, a testament to her personal courage and persistence in making sure that the inquiry was not blown off course by the understandable anger that followed the immediate tragedy.
Well, can I also add my personal congratulations to my right honourable friend on his knighthood, and can I say that I absolutely agree with him at the importance of ensuring that the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire is able to provide the truth, to get to the answers of exactly why what happened, and to ensure that justice is provided for the victims and survivors. It is a statutory inquiry. It has the power to compel witnesses and the production of evidence. I think that is important. Anyone who is found to have misled the inquiry would face prosecution. I hope this gives confidence to the survivors and people in the local community that this is an inquiry which will indeed get to the truth.
Julie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Ian has lifelong profound learning and physical disabilities. He's doubly incontinent, cannot wash, dress or cook for himself. He's no notion of personal safety and left unsupervised is at risk. He's able to live independently thanks to the support of his elderly mother, who is herself unwell, and by virtue of a local authority social care package. Now, Ian's PIP application that he needs to fund this care has been refused on the grounds that he can cope unaided. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? There is something very wrong with a system that punishes citizens whose only crime is to be born disabled. Will she agree to investigate on behalf of the thousands of vulnerable people who are being made to suffer?
can I say to the Honourable Lady that obviously she raised a specific case, and I'm sure she will understand I don't have the details to address that specific case, and I don't think it would be right to do so here in this chamber. What I can assure her and other members of the House are that individual cases that are raised with me in Prime Minister's questions are taken extremely seriously, and this one will be no exception. So I will ensure that the case is looked at urgently by the relevant minister. Obviously, cases are complex, they are multifaceted, but the case will be looked at urgently.
Nadine Dorries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents have been incredibly tolerant in the face of the fiasco that has followed their commuter journey following the reorganisation of the timetables. However, added to their misery is the fact that when trains do turn up, they are incredibly overcrowded. I have written to Govia 3 times and asked them, could they please conduct a risk assessment on the safety of my passengers, my constituents, who are their passengers, as they come into London. And 3 times Govia have refused to answer me. Could the Prime Minister please use her good officers to ensure that on overcrowded trains at the moment and those suffering because of the rail delays, that our passengers are safe?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that she raises an important issue, and the experience that passengers for Govia Thameslink but also Northern have had as a result of the change in timetable and the way that was done is simply unacceptable. And it is important that they improve the services. They have plans in place. I think Govia Thameslink, for example, are introducing a new timetable that is better than the pre-May timetable, which will have 200 more planned journeys. But of course, passengers need to know, passengers want to feel that they're able to travel in trains that aren't too crowded. And certainly this is an issue that I'm sure that Govia Thameslink will be looking at very seriously. We are working, the Department of Transport is working with the company and Northern to ensure that we can provide the services that people deserve. They pay for a ticket, they book a ticket, they pay for a season ticket, they deserve to have a decent journey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The average length of time that a Stroud constituent has to wait to go to the Gloucester and Cheltenham Centre for a PIP appeal is now 41 weeks. It's 31 weeks for an ESA appeal. Now, during that period of time, constituents are now losing mobility cars and suffering enormous hardship. Will the Prime Minister promise to get a grip of this and to make sure that this hardship is not endured any longer?
Very good question.
That, of course, it's important that people are able to have their appeals heard in a timely fashion. And my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, is looking at exactly this issue to see what can be done in the tribunal system to ensure that people get a more timely result.
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, Mr. Andrei Parubi, to Westminster, although I suspect he is utterly mystified by the events about 10 minutes ago. Will she take this opportunity to reaffirm the support of the UK for Ukraine, which is in the front line against Russian aggression? And does she share the concern of Ukraine, as well as Lithuania and Poland, about the strategic threat of the Nord Stream 2 Russian gas pipeline?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that I'm very happy to reaffirm the United Kingdom's commitment and support for the Ukraine. I was very pleased only a matter of a few weeks ago to be able to have a further conversation with President Poroshenko about the support that we are able to give to the Ukraine, the work we're doing with Ukraine in the reforms that are being put through, but also, as I mentioned earlier in response to a previous question, I think it's important that the European Union maintains the sanctions on Russia because Minsk agreements have not been put in place and fully implemented, and I think we continue to need to show the Russians that we do not accept what they have done in the Ukraine.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's almost a year since the government promised its domestic violence and abuse bill, and publication of that bill will trigger a cross-party amendment with widespread support to decriminalise abortion across the whole of the UK, which is long overdue. Will the bill be published before the summer recess, and will the Prime Minister give a commitment today on the floor of the House that her MPs will have a free vote on decriminalisation?
First of all, the Honourable Lady's raised a number of aspects of this issue. The first one, I would say, is that the reason that Domestic Violence and Abuse Bill will be published in draft first, but we have been taking our time through the consultation to work with those who are involved in working with the victims of domestic violence and abuse, to hear from the victims and survivors of domestic violence and abuse, because we want to make sure that as we bring this legislation together in this new bill, we are getting it right for people. Now, she refers to the issue of abortion. I believe that it is absolutely right that a woman should have the right to a safe and legal abortion. As regards Northern Ireland, I believe it is the best way, and my preferred way is for that decision to be taken by the elected politicians in Northern Ireland, because it is a devolved matter. As regards votes on abortion in this House, they have always been treated as conscience matters, and therefore they will be subject to a free vote.
Julia Lopez.
NICE decides whether to fund new treatments for neuroblastoma, a vicious childhood cancer which is affecting my constituent Isla Caton. Will the Prime Minister encourage NICE and drugs companies to do a deal to provide new treatments for children in Britain instead of families fundraising to receive such treatments in America?
I know my honourable friend has raised this issue on behalf of her constituents. I believe she has a constituency case which is particularly raises this particular issue. NICE is developing guidelines for the NHS on the use of dinutuximab beta, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, for the treatment of high-risk neuroblastoma. And it's not been able to recommend the drug as a clinically and cost-effective use of resources in its draft guidance, but it has consulted stakeholders on its draft recommendations. It is an ongoing NICE appraisal. It is not for government to intervene in that, but they will take all the comments that are made very obviously into account when they're making their final guidance. And I think the manufacturer of the drug is currently making the drug available to some NHS patients through a compassionate use scheme and has agreed to continue the scheme for patients who are currently receiving treatment.
Brendan O'Hara. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, Vernon Bogdanor called the noble Lord Hailsham's amendment that we rejected yesterday a constitutional absurdity. Whilst it is essential that this House holds the government to account and has meaningful votes on many things, does my right honourable friend agree that it is absolutely essential that the separation of powers is observed and that in any compromise amendment it is clear that the job of the government and the job of Parliament is different?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I'm happy to be clear about this situation. Of course, what we've seen is concerns raised about the role of Parliament in relation to the Brexit process. What I agreed yesterday is that as the bill goes back to the Lords, we would have further discussions with colleagues over those concerns, and I have agreed this morning with the Brexit Secretary that we will bring forward an amendment in the Lords. But there are a number of issues, a number of things that will guide our approach in doing so. My honourable friend is absolutely right about the separation of powers and the different role between the government and Parliament. As my right honourable friend, the Brexit Secretary, made clear yesterday in the House, a government's hand in negotiations cannot be tied by Parliament. But government must be accountable to Parliament. Government determines policy, and Parliament, then we need parliamentary support to be able to implement that policy. But the other aspect of this that I am absolutely clear on is that I cannot countenance Parliament being able to overturn the will of the British people. Parliament gave the decision to the British people. The British people voted to leave the European Union, and as Prime Minister, I'm determined to deliver that.
Pete Wishart, not here. Yes. Jack Lepresti.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 15 months ago, the then Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government called in the planned expansion of the Mall at Cribbs Causeway in my constituency, a plan which represents huge economic benefit to the Bristol and South Gloucestershire area. There are 3,000 construction jobs, 3,750 permanent jobs and 150 new homes at stake in this expansion, as well as a significant amount of infrastructure investment. Now, will the Prime Minister urge the new Secretary of State to start as he means to go on and make a good decision quickly
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that obviously he's referred to the independent public inquiry, and that after that took place, my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, called this decision in. He is considering the inspector's report. What I can say to my honourable friend is that I understand that the Secretary of State hopes to issue his decision on or before the published target date of the 2nd of August.
F. Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it took nearly 5,000 cancelled trains in just 3 weeks for the Transport Secretary to notice the Northern Rail crisis. If this government can't run our railways properly, will the Prime Minister agree with businesses, council leaders and over 25 newspapers from across the region and give Transport for the North the powers it needs to do the job?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have given Transport for the North unprecedented powers to influence decisions about transport investment in the North. But what's more, we've backed them up with £260 million of government funding. So it has the powers to deliver a transport strategy, which the government must formally consider, has powers to fund organisations and deliver transport projects. And those and their other powers are exactly what Transport for the North requested.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, I know, is aware of the severe difficulties that my constituents in Hitchin and Harpenden have faced with recent delays to train services. Would the Prime Minister reassure me and my constituents that going forward the government will do everything it can to ensure that GTR and Network Rail get into shape to ensure a better quality and higher quality train service both now and into the future?
Can I say to my honourable friend that, as I said in response to the earlier question from our honourable friend, the immediate priority is to ensure that we're seeing an improvement in services for the passengers on Govia Thameslink. And that is why they have introduced a new timetable, which is not the what will be the final timetable, but is better than the pre-May timetable. But what we also need to do is to ensure that they take the action so that they can bring forward that proposed new timetable, which will provide more services and better services for passengers. But in the long term, what the government is working to do is to bring train and track together so that we don't see problems like this in the future.
Chris Law, not here. All these opposition opportunities are being lost. I think that shouldn't continue. Chris Williamson.
The Prime Minister will be aware that schools are often targeted in war zones. And a couple of months ago, I met Year 7 students from Leesbrook School in my constituency who implored me to ask the Prime Minister to sign the Safe Schools Declaration, which I understand has subsequently been signed. So my question to the Prime Minister today is, does that declaration mean that she will now veto future arms sales to brutal regimes like Saudi Arabia, which has been targeting schools as part of its military campaign in Yemen?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, the issue of the education of girls and boys in conflict zones is an important one. It was one which was addressed at the G7 summit. We have been clear as the United Kingdom government that we are providing financial support to ensure 12 years of quality education for girls, particularly in developing countries. And the G7 summit gave its commitment not only in financial terms to provide, as we contributed more, to provide for quality education, but also to focus that on those areas where there are conflict zones and where particular action needs to be taken to ensure that that education can be provided.
Very sadly, my constituent, Gina Turgill, lost her life last week, aged 95. Gina survived the Krakow ghetto, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and she became known as the Bride of Belsen when she married her liberator. Will my right honourable friend join with me in celebrating the life of Gina, who dedicated her life to informing young people about the horrors of the Holocaust and ensuring that although a light has gone out, her legacy lives?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I am happy to join him in paying tribute to Gina Turgill and to the work that she did over so many years. She was one of the first survivors to go into schools to share her story. I have seen, as I'm sure other honourable and right honourable members have, the impact that a survivor from the Holocaust going into schools and explaining what happened has on young people. It is moving, and she showed considerable determination and strength, and I think her example is truly humbling. And it's right that her legacy is going to live on in the National Holocaust Memorial and the accompanying education centre. That will be housing her testimony for generations to come. We must never forget what Gina taught us. We must fight hatred and prejudice in all its forms.
Anna McMorrin.
On her walking holidays in Wales, the Prime Minister must have seen our beautiful beaches. But plastic is killing our oceans and polluting our seas. Would the Prime Minister stay in here for a few minutes after PMQs and listen to my 10-minute rule bill on plastic pollution, support it so we can save our seas?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, when I go walking in Wales, I tend to walk up and down hills rather than on the beaches, but I know that Wales has some fantastic beaches, and she's raised a very important issue about the plastic. She's raised a very important issue about marine plastic, and that is an issue which I think the UK public, as well as members across this House, have shown great energy in picking up this cause and wanting to fight against plastic waste. And indeed, the UK is going to be leading the newly formed Commonwealth Clean Oceans Alliance jointly with Vanuatu. And we're committing £61 million to fund global research and improve waste management in developing countries to tackle plastic pollution. This again was another issue that we took forward in the G7 summit as well, and got commitments in relation to dealing with plastic waste in that. And can I just say to the Honourable Lady, with the greatest of respect, I'm sorry, I think my diary has already been slightly changed as a result of what has been happening in the chamber today, and I will not be able to, I regret, I won't be able to sit and listen to her bill.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that those people who want to have a meaningful vote in this House, which would allow this House to vote to stay in the European Union, would be betraying the result of the referendum and show how much the Labour Party have lost touch with working class people up and down this country? And would she further agree that those people who want to take no deal from the government's negotiating hand would only incentivise the European Union not to negotiate at all in any meaningful way, and betray not only the result of the referendum, but betray the best interests of the British people?
Can I say to my honourable friend, as we go ahead with these Brexit negotiations, we are, of course, ensuring that we're making preparations for all eventualities. That is entirely right and proper for the government to do. But as I set out in response to our honourable friend earlier, what I'm also clear about is that Parliament can not be allowed. I cannot countenance Parliament overturning the will of the British people. The British people were given the vote, given the choice as to whether to stay in the European Union. This Parliament gave that choice to them overwhelmingly by the vote in this Parliament. It is right that we listen to the British people and we deliver what they asked us to do, which is to leave the European Union.
Angela Crawley. Not here. Chris Evans.
For numbers of years, we used to hold, in Islam, we used to hold a commemorative march for test veterans to commemorate their service to our country. Last week, they were in the House of Commons campaigning for a medal for their service. Will the Prime Minister look at their campaign and with a view to giving them a medal for their service they give to this country?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, this is, I think, the first time that the issue he's raised with me has been raised with me, and I'll look carefully at what he's said in the House.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the father of twin girls who, happily growing up in Blackton, enjoyed a very equal upbringing and education, I celebrate the announcement of the G7 supporting girls' education. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that we should support equality for women across the globe?
Yes, I'm very happy. I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in agreeing with that, and in saying that there are many ways in which we can express that and put that into practice, not just in supporting girls' education, but the work in which we're doing on modern slavery, which does affect men as well as women. We see many women from around the globe being trafficked into other countries for sexual or labour exploitation, and we are leading the fight to ensure that they have equality and are not put into that position.
Ursula Thulis. Not here. Tom Brake.
Not here.
Order. 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 Mr. Brake is here. And he's always here. And he stands every week. And he's going to be heard. Mr. Brake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The President of the CBI said today that sections of the UK car industry face extinction unless the UK stays in the EU customs union. Is there any level of damage inflicted by Brexit that will cause the Prime Minister to consider supporting a final say on the deal for the people and a chance to exit from a disastrous Brexit, something I could also put to the Leader of the Opposition?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, as I've said many times in this House, we are looking to ensure that the future customs arrangement we have with the European Union enables us to have as frictionless trade with the European Union as possible, no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but also enables us to have an independent trade policy and negotiate trade deals around the world. I've been clear in a number of answers in this House this afternoon that I and this government will deliver on the vote of the British people to leave the European Union. And I seem to remember that there was a time when the Liberal Democrat Party thought the people should have the choice.
Finally for today, Mr. Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today marks the Princess Diana Awards Stand Up to School Bullies Day. While much progress has been made, too many young people take their own lives as a result of bullying in schools. Will the Prime Minister congratulate the people at the Diana Awards for their work and recommit her government to tackling this scourge?
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this? Can I say I'm very happy to join with him in congratulating the work of all those involved in the Diana Award and to say that this is a really important issue that he has raised. We have made progress, but as he has pointed out, too many young people are bullied in schools, and sadly that sometimes has tragic consequences. We are providing funding, £1.7 million over the next 2 years for 4 anti-bullying organisations, one of which is the Diana Award. But more does need to be done, as he says, and we will continue to press hard on this issue and to work hard to eliminate this bullying.
Order. I must just say to the House, and I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister, and before we come to points of order, that for all the turbulence and discord of today's proceedings, the little baby who has been observing them has been a model of impeccable behaviour from start to finish.
Well, those words from John Bercow, the Speaker, end what can only be described as an extraordinary PMQs. You could argue it was a Prime Minister's questions of two halves, half with the SNP inside the chamber, as you would expect, and half without them. And the reason they weren't there for the second half is because the SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford was kicked out of the Commons for the rest of the day, actually, by the Speaker because he repeatedly challenged John Bercow. And this was all over a row because Ian Blackford wanted to hold a vote in the middle of Prime Minister's questions, and that would have been a vote to have more debate and more discussion, an emergency debate on devolution powers, which was supposed to be part of the withdrawal bill debate yesterday, but they were curtailed for various reasons. Anyway, he wouldn't sit down. He was kicked out. He was followed loyally by his troops, and that then meant that the order paper, with all the questions that everyone expects to be asked, had to be thrown out because 6 of them were from SNP members who were no longer in the House. So let's rewind to the beginning of the first half of PMQs and Jeremy Corbyn's questions, which were, as you would expect, on Brexit. And he challenged the divisions in the Cabinet and in the government. But before he did that, he did refer to Grenfell, the first anniversary of the Grenfell fire tragedy, and he talked about the accommodation, housing, and said that many of the survivors' families are still waiting for a permanent home 1 year on. The Prime Minister said that 203 households needed a new home and that 183 have accepted an offer of permanent accommodation. It's difficult for the Prime Minister this week because she did a sort of mea culpa where she regretted not talking to the families in the immediate aftermath of that fire when she went to visit the site. But after that, it was very much full throttle on Brexit, fairly fiery, fairly lively from both sides, with the Prime Minister accusing Labour of trying to frustrate the process, and the Prime Minister said she would not do anything that would overturn the referendum result. So that was Prime Minister's questions. At the end of all that, Claire Perry, perhaps the two difficult points for the Prime Minister were from Jacob Rees-Mogg, Tory Brexiteer, and Philip Davis, who wanted guarantees that Parliament wouldn't be able to frustrate the will of the people as they saw it, or direct the government in the negotiations. Did she give them that guarantee?
Well, she did. I think two things were important. One is that she confirmed that the government will bring an amendment to clarify these A and B points and potentially the C point we were discussing. And she also set out again the constitutional rule that says Parliament is there essentially to hold government to account, but it is not there to give government marching orders, to paraphrase. So I think she did clarify. And again, we had a very interesting debate with Anna Soubry and Nigel, and I don't think they disagreed on that point.
Right. Well,
so it's going to be in the drafting, and we'll revisit this again, but this will all be done and dusted within a few days.
All right. Claire Perry, we have to let you go because, of course, we have overrun. I forgot to say that to our viewers. You may have noticed it's now after 1 o'clock, so we've overrun because of PMQs. Just listening to what Claire Perry has said, do you think what the Prime Minister said, and to use her words, she said, we need parliamentary support, but Parliament can't overturn the will of the people, but we will bring forward this amendment. Has she gone further than what we understood this morning from her Solicitor General, and will it satisfy both sides?
What she has said is there definitely will be an amendment, and late last night and this morning the Solicitor General was being a bit more careful about the language. He was saying the expectation is that there will be an amendment. That's the likely outcome of these very difficult negotiations they've now got to have inside their own party, but she did confirm there will be an amendment. So look, gauntlet laid down to poor old Robert Buckland, who doesn't just have to take the debates this afternoon, but has to actually try to a compromise that doesn't just satisfy the political sides inside the Tory party, but also the legalities of this whole question. And a senior Brexiteer this morning raised a slightly different concern to me this morning. We've got to make sure that these amendments are legally watertight and couldn't actually be challenged to the Supreme Court. So this isn't just say, get a few people in the room, knock a few heads and you'll come up with a compromise. It's much, much more complicated than that. So I think, both sides will be fine with the fact she's confirmed there will be an amendment. How you get a compromise, that's a very different question.
Because Philip Davis, the Conservative MP, said and wanted assurances that the issue of no deal, the option of no deal with the EU mustn't be taken off the table. Has it been taken off the table?
No, I don't think it has. I mean, some of the analysis yesterday was suggesting it has somehow been taken off the table because the Prime Minister gave assurances that MPs will have more power if the deal is kicked out by Parliament. But as things stand, it's absolutely not been crossed off. And, Brexiteers are adamant it has to stay on the table in some shape or form. But again, this is about how do you sort of compromise the reality with the political desires of a very divided party. It's really, really hard. And to use a technical term, this morning, both sides in this debate have been going tonto.
Right. Tony, we are going to come to you, I promise. But Ian Blackford, leader of the SNP in Westminster, surrounded, flanked by his members of Parliament there, smiling outside. So you got your publicity, Ian Blackford. Was that the aim here, to get maximum coverage for your position?
Not at all. I think what you see here is a party which is very much united, both here and in Holyrood. And if I may say so, the fundamental issue here is that the Scottish Parliament, with the support of the SNP, of the Labour Party, of the Liberal Democrats and of the Greens, have refused to give a consent motion to what is the power grab of the Westminster government. And what we saw last night is the government ramming through legislation that takes responsibility of 24 areas back from the Scottish Parliament, but remarkably without debate. Not one single Scottish MP was able to speak in that debate. The Minister spoke for just over 15 minutes without any of us being able to respond. Joe, that's a democratic outrage. And we really needed to signal to the government in Westminster that we have a responsibility to stand up for the interests of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people. And that is what we've done today. And I signal to the government in Westminster that we will simply not sit back and allow powers to be taken back from the Scottish Parliament for devolution to be ripped up by a Conservative party that has a long history of being anti-devolution in Scotland.
Right, we'll come on to whether they've been ripped up. But on the basis of your tactics here today, Has it backfired? Because it seems that actually they may have been minded, the Speaker might have been minded to give you the debate that you wanted to discuss the so-called power grab that you have just outlined, and now you've been kicked out. You're not allowed back in for the rest of the day, and so you won't be able to vote on the rest of the important part of the withdrawal bill. What's the point of that?
Well, the simple fact of the matter is what I asked the Prime Minister this afternoon was to bring forward emergency legislation that would respect the interests of the Scottish
And you
Parliament.
might have got it.
No, she refused to do it. We may have got a debate in Parliament, but it would not have allowed us to deal with the situation that the government has railroaded through legislation that takes powers from Scotland. We have a responsibility, nay, we have a duty to stand up for the people that sent us here.
But you have lost your opportunity now to have a debate, haven't you?
No. Well, look, a debate, but to what end? We need to demonstrate to the government that this is the beginning of something and not the end.
So what are you going to do now, Ian?
We will hold this government to account. We will use parliamentary procedures to best effect.
So you're going to try
but the relationship, but let me say this to you, the relationship between the SNP parliamentary group and the government now changes. The relationship between the Scottish Government and Westminster now changes.
How?
Because what we've seen is a complete lack of respect for our government.
So
they are taking us on. They are going to find we will be taking them on. We will use every measure at our disposal.
Laura?
I was just going to ask Ian Blackford, you say you'll use every measure though, but on a very simple point of fact, had you sat down today when the Speaker asked you to do so, he might have granted you the very debate that you're insisting you've been denied. And in fact, the Minister, David Liddington, last night in the debate apparently took 8 interventions. You say the Minister spoke for 15 minutes and didn't listen to anybody else.
Yeah, Laura, he took interventions. That's not the same as actually allowing SNP MPs to put the case, and indeed for our amendments to be put. We were promised time and again by David Mundell, who has failed as a Secretary of State for Scotland, that we would have debate in the Commons. We haven't had any of that. He's supposed to be there to stand up for Scotland. Frankly, he should resign, and he should resign now. He has let Scotland down.
So you're calling for the Secretary of State of Scotland to resign over this.
He should go.
Can I ask you to explain and elaborate on what sort of action you and your colleagues are going to take when you say you're taking the government on and the relationship has changed? How? What are you going to do?
We will do that on a day-by-day and a week-by-week basis, but I am signalling that we have a responsibility to indicate that we cannot sit back and allow Westminster to rip up the devolution settlement, to take back powers from the Scottish Parliament.
How have they ripped up the devolution settlement?
Because very simply, because the Scotland Act 1988 laid out what were reserved matters. Those that were not specifically defined as reserved matters were devolved. Areas such as fishing, areas such as agriculture, areas such as the environment. And without the agreement, and that is the key point, without the agreement of the Scottish Parliament, Westminster is interfering in what are devolved powers. Who is sovereign in this? Is it Westminster or is it the people of Scotland? I'll tell you this, it's the people of Scotland.
So when are you going to be sitting back in Parliament?
I'll be back in Parliament tomorrow, and I'll be getting on with my job in holding this government that acting against Scottish interests fully to account.
All right, just bear with us. Tony Lloyd, listening to that, will that have an impact? Are there parliamentary tactics and behaviour that can be used to put pressure on the government over this?
Well, let me say I've got genuine sympathy for the point that Ian Blackford made about the lack of debate yesterday, because other issues, Northern Ireland, for example, hugely important in the Brexit debate, was squeezed out.
But wasn't that Labour's fault? Wasn't it Labour that extended the discussion on other things that actually squeezed the debate that Ian Blackford would have liked to have had on the issue?
I think Labour voted against the programme motion, as indeed the SNP and the other parties did yesterday, because we said there was not enough time for debate. The problem came, there were many items that we wanted to vote on. That's absolutely legitimate. That's what Parliament's there for. That's had the consequence that when the Minister came to speak, he did take 50 minutes. Yes, he took some interventions, but the reality is he talked the issues out. So neither devolution nor Northern Ireland got a word from anybody other than the Minister. He didn't even mention Northern Ireland in his written
But isn't this all about process? It's all about talk, about processes within Parliament. When you're talking to voters and you're talking to the audience of the Daily Politics, they want to know what's happening with the Brexit process. You know, they don't necessarily want to know about who is debating against whom and that limits someone else's debate on something else.
And nor should they. But therefore it was incumbent on the government to make sure there was adequate time within this whole EU withdrawal debate yesterday and again today for these really important issues. You know, this is probably the most important constitutional change this the United Kingdom, I say with respect to Ian Blackford and the SNP, has been through now for in living memory. To give 2 days, and within that 2 days, very truncated time for debate, is ridiculous.
Right, Ian Blackford, I don't know whether you were able then to hear the questions once you had left the chamber. The questions from Jacob Rees-Mogg, Tory MP, and his colleague Philip Davis, calling for reassurance that Parliament would not be able to direct the government when it came to the negotiations if they came back with a no deal. Do you think that is the priority now for Theresa May going forward on the negotiations?
Well, I think she probably duped her own rebels yesterday. I mean, there is still a big job in front of us. I mean, we've got to, of course, protect Scotland's position, but as part of that, we've an absolute requirement to stay in the single market and the customs union. And I'm appealing to MPs across the House to make sure that that is what we deliver. What we don't want to see out of Brexit would be an act of an enormous self-harm, the loss of jobs, the loss of prosperity. And that's the real risk from Brexit. And working across the chamber, we've got to make sure that that's what happens. But at the same time, we've got a very big job to make sure we can overturn the power grab against the people of Scotland.
All right. Are any of the SNP MPs going back into the chamber today?
Well, that'll be up to them. The only person that's been excluded for the day has been myself.
Right. Can I do a show of hands? Any of you going back into the chamber
today?
Anybody
going back into the chamber today? I don't know. I mean, look, today is
you
one
will
day.
Be.
But yeah,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Listen, thank you very much for joining us. Good job it's sunny out there, isn't it? Might have not been quite so pleasant anyway. Ian Blackford, there. Final comments.
Look, this shows this is one of the dynamics in the Brexit process, the relationship with the devolved administrations, with Cardiff and Holyrood. It's gone bust. You know, the Welsh and the government managed to find an accommodation, but quite clearly there's been a real breakdown of trust between the SNP government in Edinburgh and the Westminster government.
But how much of a real problem is that for Theresa May? I mean, she doesn't really need...
This is the question. Right now, when you talk to the government privately about it, they say, well, OK, if the SNP's not on board, we can just crack on. But as you see, for the SNP, they are furious about that idea. There is an untested principle about whether or not the government can really do this without the Scottish Parliament's consent. But to crack on without it, of course, has really big implications potentially for the debate in Scotland between all the political parties there.
Right, and just in the closing seconds, I mean, is there any deal that you'll vote in favour of if you want the same benefits, as is stated in your manifesto, as being in the single market and the customs union, which the Prime Minister says we're going to leave? There's no deal that will be satisfactory to you?
There's no deal this Prime Minister is trying to negotiate. There is a deal, I believe, that the European Union would want, because it would do one of the principal things, actually, is to make sure we had no hard border within Ireland or between Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
Right, well...
That's all, folks.